Hello and welcome along to the latest Liverpool Echo Blood Red podcast. I'm Matt Addison, back after taking Friday's podcast off with Paul Gorst, David Lynch and Keifer MacDonald all alongside me this afternoon. We'll preview the final Champions League group match with Napoli in a short while, but we do unfortunately need to begin with another defeat for the Reds, this time at Anfield. Crescencio Somerville with the winning goal late on for Leeds United. Another poor showing really from Liverpool once again, Gorstiel. Come to you first. I mean, Manchester City and West Ham beaten in the recent past, but then defeats to Nottingham Forest and Leeds. It's just that inconsistency, really. It just doesn't seem to make much sense for Liverpool this season.
No, it doesn't. It kind of makes those wins a bit pointless, really. What's the point of beating Man City if you're going to go and lose to Forest a week later, or even West Ham? You know, David Moyes hasn't got a good record at all against the traditional Big Six, but even that was, quite a good win against a decent West Ham side. And then they go and do what they do against Forest, and then compounded by the game against Leeds. The match itself was a strange one. I was kind of, writing in our live match blog at the time that this is a bit of a weird game. It's a bit of an odd game. There were so many individual errors, just loose passes, poor touches, moans and groans from the stands from very early on, and then the goal Liverpool conceded, the first one, kind of summed up the season in a way, didn't it? Rodrigo won't get an easier goal in his career, and it was laid on a play for him by Liverpool's centre-back and goalkeeper, kind of combining for a comedy of errors. Liverpool might be able to say that they did enough to win the game, and it was only that the goalkeeper pulled out a remarkable number of saves. But I said to Theo Squires, who was sitting next to me at the time, they're not saves that, they weren't world-class saves. You're not quite sure how he's got to it or whatever. They were just fairly comfortable that you'd expect the Premier League goalkeeper to make. I think he would have been disappointed if he would have been beaten with any of them, really. Núñez was unlucky with his other one, but all the rest were fairly routine, weren't they? And then just when you're kind of lamenting more drop points, and it's another game where Liverpool haven't won, and where does this leave them in the shake-up, they go and lose it. And it's the first defeat since March 2021, and at Anfield, 29 games, I think that is. And then obviously the first defeat in front of fans since April the 23rd, 2017. And it kind of shattered the Anfield door, and Liverpool are now looking up at 9th. And it's just incredible, really, how a poor couple of months have seemingly undone 5 years of progress. Because it really does look that serious at the moment for me. And I don't think Liverpool are going to get top four now. I think there's too many teams in the shake-up for it, and they're already 8 points back on Newcastle. And that'll set Liverpool back years unless there is a major kind of rethink on how the football club is run from top to bottom by the owners, because we know that they don't spend. They rely so heavily on the Champions League income, and if that's not there for them next season, then where does this leave the club? Where does this leave the squad that's going to need major kind of an injection of youth and quality? I hope I'm not being too much of a doom-monger, but it really is majorly concerning. And it's just incredible that, first week of August straight through to the last days of October, that's all it's taken for us to get to this point. And it's a huge concern, from how I see it anyway.
Yeah, it was a really, really strange night, actually. As you say, a few little errors all over the pitch, players slipping over and not doing the basics. Bit weird in the stands as well. And I think Lynchy, up until that point, there'd been a bit of chat really around the away form. Hadn't been great. There was maybe a bit of a feeling that it'll be okay at Anfield, even if it's not going the way that Liverpool want it to away from home. But they've not even got that to cling to now. It wasn't as if Leeds didn't deserve this result. They've kind of come to Anfield, and as Gorsty said, the aura now is just shattered. There'll be other teams, Napoli, as we're going to come to, future teams in future weeks. They're going to look at it and think, well, it's just not the same Liverpool compared to what it was.
Yeah, I mean, I joked to someone at Anfield before we sort of went up to watch the game that I fully expected Liverpool to thrash Leeds and put in a fairly decent performance, and then 100% get beat at Spurs away to follow it up, because I just feel like that's the way the season has gone. But then to lose to Leeds and in the way they did, which has been touched upon there, is a fairly the expected goals for both sides are fairly even. Again, it was another one of those games where Liverpool had turned it into a bit of a coin flip, and they've come out on the wrong side of it. And there is an element of luck involved in those sorts of games sometimes, and The way Leeds get that chance at the end and then put it away is, yeah, okay, you're unfortunate. You could have come away with a point, or maybe one of those chances just falls for you and you win the game. But if you're consistently putting in performances like that, whereby you're giving the opposition as many chances as you're creating yourself, then you at the behest really of how the sort of luck falls. Might as well roll the dice to start the game and see how it goes really. And with the quality of the player that Liverpool are putting on the pitch, or certainly reputationally anyway, they should be doing a lot more in games than that. And it's just really, really is concerning. And I think Gorst is right to touch upon sort of the long-term concerns in terms of what they do, but also, it's tied into a lot of long contracts here with a lot of players who seemingly have just fallen off a cliff all of a sudden. And, you look at some of the contenders for the top four, and I agree that Liverpool will probably be nowhere near that now. I think they've just given themselves too much to do. But, it's okay, for example, for Liverpool to not consistently challenge a Manchester City side who are capable of spending what they do. For example, they go out last summer after winning the title and sign Haaland on an eye-watering contract that Liverpool can't get anywhere near. Totally accept that that's fine. But to allow teams like Arsenal and Newcastle, who, Newcastle have spent a bit, but you look at their 11, it shouldn't be above Liverpool. That shouldn't be happening. But to allow those teams to just walk past you through pure complacency and believing that it's not possible to improve upon this squad, it's got to be such a certain standard, and then see Brendan Aronson completely running the show at Anfield, and a midfield that just looks so leggy and off it in comparison. I'm pretty sure there were players out there that could have improved this team, and I just think that what's happened to get to this point is, you could see some small signs towards the back end of last season, but complacency is completely set in, and I think that's why we find ourselves where we are, in that, that work hasn't been undone overnight. The good work of the previous 5 years, I think it's been a slow process building towards where they've basically taken a few summers off and not done the right thing, not done enough in certain situations, and it's added up, and the cumulative effect is this just very, very sudden collapse. And I think I said it on the last podcast, in fact, that I think there's a lot more pain to come this season, because I think the solutions aren't there at the club already. This work should have been done before, and I think there's more poor performances to come, because it's not just a case of, okay, the injuries might be hurting Liverpool at the moment, but there are several other things that aren't just solved by players coming back, and this squad needs surgery to get back there, and then that suddenly becomes much harder if you don't get the Champions League, which they probably won't. So yeah, not a good situation, not a good night. That's my joyous take on things, I suppose.
Yeah, plenty more pain to come on this podcast, I think. Forget the rest of this season. But you mentioned Newcastle there. Bruno Guimaraes is one that you'd look at and go, well, surely he would have been one that Liverpool looked at. Wasn't exactly unknown, wasn't out of their price range. That there were options, Keifer. And once again, we are talking about that midfield. Obviously switched a little bit in the last couple of games to that diamond, but I just didn't think that system particularly worked very well for the individuals or collectively on Saturday.
No, exactly. It was kind of more of what we've kind of been used to seeing in recent weeks, or since the start of the season, really. And individuals, not performing. I mean, even Thiago, who's such a good retainer of the ball. How many passes did he misplace on Saturday night? And again, Fabinho, kind of his problems continued, didn't they? Just again, not really sure what the problem is. Whether it's just how much football he's played, but he just kind of looks half the player that he was last season, and in kind of the mix of it. And I know there's been times in his Liverpool career when he has come back from injuries, and it does take a bit to get up and going. I think it was 2019, wasn't it, when he got that injury at Napoli? It was a couple of months out, and then it wasn't really until after the pandemic and Project Restart that he kind of came into his own again. But his form, and like David touched on then, he was handed a long contract next summer. We've got 4 years left on that now, so it's like, if he's not performing at his best at the minute, long term he's on big money, and not that I'm suggesting that he should be sold or whatever, but as you say, you kind of put so much faith in these players in recent years, which obviously they deserve because of the performances that they've kind of continually had. But maybe it's just that toll of how many games they've played and kind of how high stake the games have been. You look at last year from January to May, there wasn't really any games where you could say that Liverpool could rotate with ease, and that's obviously kind of come back to kind of bite them now. And Klopp obviously today was quite defiant in terms of saying about to judge this group of players, maybe it's not the right time, or maybe it's not fair to judge himself as well. I do get that in a sense of, there is so many caveats around what is wrong with Liverpool at the minute. I think, if you compare it to the 2021 centre-back crisis, I think everyone could kind of, comfortably pinpoint the issue and be like, that, if this gets sorted, that's the issue. And, Liverpool were playing 10 yards deeper, the press had gone and kind of thing, and teams are kind of just, passing through them. But then they signed Canate, didn't they, at the end of the season, and then there was kind of that hope that, things will go back to normal, which obviously they did last year. But I think at the minute, it's seemingly impossible to kind of tell, what the issue is for Liverpool. And I mean, you can point the fingers at, investment, which I think, Klopp has been let down to an extent. He said he was happy with his midfield options, didn't he? But, it's kind of hard to tell what goes on higher up in the club, whether he's just kind of saving face and ultimately gets, left with Arthur Melo on deadline day with hours left of the window. And, I think, that signing probably tells you everything you need to know about kind of the recruitment. And for a team that have been so, in terms of like planning for the future and stuff like that, they've, been so great in recent years. They've kind of been the envy of Europe in terms of how they've been able to recruit ahead of windows. I mean, you look at how they got Carvalho tied down to that deal, even start picking up Elliott for so cheap. And, now it kind of looks at, or where do they go? Because they kind of put all their eggs in this one basket of next summer is going to be the big midfield revamp, and whether that be Jude Bellingham or whoever that is going to be. But if you don't have Champions League football on offer, it's very hard to say. Especially in the circumstances and the way Liverpool are playing, it's very hard to kind of have that pull. As great as Liverpool might be as a historic club, it's very hard to sell that to someone like Jude Bellingham, who's going to have the pick of any club in Europe. Whether that be Manchester City or Real Madrid. So I think, once you lose out on that, and then obviously we know how FSG run in terms of a self-sustaining model, which I don't think anyone has a problem with, but it's when you kind of take that money that is the self-sustaining model, and you take that away into the Champions League football, that is going to be a real problem, because then they are going to be having to put their hands into their own pockets. And I think for the final last year, the run to Paris, what did they get? Near enough 100 million. So take that out, next year. Say they don't get to the final this year, don't get to the final, or they're not in the Champions League next year. That's a huge slice of the cake that Liverpool won't be able to kind of play with and deal with. And then when you think that Newcastle are going to have 2 or 3 more windows, then to kind of strengthen that team that as they've touched on it, isn't a great team when you look at it. There's plenty of players that have been there under Benitez and Bruce. They've brought in Dan Burn, Matt Targett, Joe Linton, is running stuff from midfield after being a failed striker. Obviously, you got Bruno in the middle of the park, who's probably been the one marquee signing so far. But to think Liverpool are 8 points behind them, I know they have a game in hand, but I think they're 8 points behind them, and we're not even in November yet. Is a scary thought. I think it does go further than the transfer window and that kind of things. I think there's, as David kind of said, to have 6 or 7, 8, 9 players who have just kind of seemingly dropped off a cliff between May and August is scary, and I don't think that's, and I think that's why people haven't been able to point a finger at what exactly is wrong, because if that was the case, as was 18 months ago, I think you'd all be saying, well, do this and do that, and Liverpool will be back to firing on all cylinders. But the reality is that isn't the case at the moment.
Yeah, James Milner said similar before, didn't he? He said, well, if it was one thing, it'd be easier to pinpoint, but there's a couple of different issues. And one of the ways that they've tried to solve it, Gorsty, is obviously with the formation there, but I'm not quite sure that that's really done much to help it. I thought, particularly in wide areas, I know you were one of those advocating for another forward signing in the summer, and that obviously didn't happen. But you look at the team, obviously Robertson was probably a standout performer. Trent on the other side did okay, but there just wasn't really any width. There wasn't anyone to carry the ball forward. It just seemed like everything was going through the middle. And I think against other teams as well, that's not ideal, but particularly against Leeds, they feel like a team which is very much centre sort of focused, really. It just didn't look quite right at Anfield.
No, it's I mean, he went for a diamond, didn't he, in the same way he did at Ajax. He said after the Ajax game he wanted to keep Núñez in more central areas rather than shutting them out wide left. So we dropped Firmino a little bit deeper and kept Salah and Núñez central. And on paper, I don't mind the sound of that, to be honest, because then you get your width from the fullbacks. But then I think Trent has kind of maybe been asked to be a little bit more reserved and a bit more conservative in terms of when he chooses to go forward. He's certainly not playing that kind of almost centre midfield role, is it, that we've seen him play last season. Robertson was probably one of Liverpool's best players, but it's just a perfect storm of everything. That we've just been at Anfield there for the Napoli press conference, and Milner and Klopp pretty much both said similar things in terms of it being, there's not just one thing that's that's the problem, really. And he can kind of fix that and get back to what we've known this Liverpool team to be. There are so many issues, and it's just kind of a knock-on effect. Going back to the summer, really, when, Mane's left, Origi and Minamino have left. I didn't think Liverpool have adequately replaced all three of those. They brought in Nunes, Avni and Carvalho, who was never meant to have played anywhere near as much as he has, I'm sure. I think he was very much one that he could drop into a winning, cohesive team that was winning games, and he'd be able to get his experience levels up in the same way that Harvey Elliott was meant to, really, but it just hasn't worked out that way. And then the injuries that have just been springing up left, right and centre. We're talking about Ibrahim Konate there in the press conference, and he might be playing tomorrow against Napoli. It's only going to be his second start of the season, and we're coming towards the World Cup break in mid-November. 19 different players have missed at least one game. Add that into the kind of, everyone's kind of saying that it's not, but I think it's staring everyone in the face, isn't it? The knock-on effect of not winning the Champions League and not winning the Premier League last season after playing 63 games must have had an impact for this team. Klopp's denied it a few times. Fabinho has denied it. One or two other players have, I'm sure, but it seems to be, indisputable at this point. So there's just so many issues that need resolving, and we'd be saying this on the back of, had they managed to have beaten Leeds on Saturday, those issues are still there, whether you're beating teams who are in the relegation zone or not. They kind of just magnified, I guess, when you do lose. But it's been a really poor week on the Premier League front for Liverpool. The refuge is the Champions League, and weirdly, I still think that Liverpool have got as good a chance as any of really getting into the latter stages of that competition. But in the league, I think we might have to accept that this is going to be a season where they're nowhere near it, and then the knock-on effects of that are really worrying, as I say. But for now, we're just looking ahead to Napoli, I guess.
Yeah, it's 4 games, obviously, isn't it, till the World Cup, and they get that little bit of a break. And I think we are all probably looking forward to a bit of a break, Lynchy, from watching this Liverpool team. But I'm not quite convinced yet. I'm trying to convince myself that it'll be all right. They'll have a bit of a break. A few of the players will go away. They'll sort something out. They'll have a few weeks together and be able to work on a few solutions. But I don't know. I still, from what I've seen so far this season, I just don't think it's going to be that easy. You've got to hope that they've got something in the bag that they're going to do in that period. But can you see a big change when they come back after that break?
I think there will be an uptick on the basis of Jota and Diaz coming back, just purely because goals win games, and sometimes you can play really poorly and score goals and win a game you probably don't deserve to. And I think having that quality on the pitch will always help you to do that. But I don't expect massive changes in terms of they'll come back from the World Cup and suddenly start controlling games. That midfield is a serious issue that isn't getting solved by time on the training pitch or a change of shape or any chats internally at Kirby, which is why it's exactly why Jurgen Klopp is constantly changing the shape every week, because he knows there's an issue there that can't be solved by what he's got available to him. So for that problem to be solved, I think Liverpool have to do something in January. But the chat from Klopp is obviously that Arthur is going to stay in January. They're not going to cancel that loan, and therefore, that justification for look how many midfielders we've got will remain through the January window. So I personally don't expect to see them do anything at this point. Really, to be honest, I'd be quite surprised. I'll say that. So yeah, I don't expect a huge upturn. I certainly don't expect them to get back to the form that they were showing last season, and that's what would be required in the second half of the season to make a run on top 4, not just top 4 form, but something way beyond that, because teams have already got such a big lead on them. So yeah, I can't see that massive change coming unless Liverpool, sort of something massively changes and they decide they want to dip into the January market and buy one of those probably 2 or 3 midfielders that are going to need next summer anyway.
That's got to be the plan, hasn't it, Keifer? You think, looking at it now, like you mentioned before, the importance of the top 4 in the Champions League. If they don't get to that point and they don't do something, then, as we've said, that the longer term impact could end up costing them a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's, I think everyone's kind of focused on a few big names, haven't they? I think, obviously Brozovic is one, Bellingham's another, but I think they're going to need a few, probably, maybe 2 or 3, if not more. I think you look at the age profile of the squad as well, and the likes of Jordan Henderson, what will be going 33 next summer. Milner will be 37. Thiago will be 32. So you're kind of looking at getting into that age of, well beyond their prime, if you want to call it that. And I know, obviously, Thiago is a fantastic player at the moment, but for a player who's so great, you can't be relying on him to play 1 in 3 games. It's just not a sustainable way of building anything or mounting any challenges on any fronts. Then obviously you've got the likes of Naby Keita and Chamberlain out of contract, obviously Milner as well. So you're looking at a massive overhaul next summer. And like I said earlier, if you aren't able to get Champions League football, it kind of goes back to, you're probably looking at what Liverpool have been doing 5 years ago in terms of getting those kind of deals like Robertson and maybe your Shaqiris and your Wijnaldums. You're probably shopping at that lower end of the table again, which is all great, but if in terms of competing with Manchester City, as David said, they win the title and they go in and add Erling Haaland to their kind of ranks, which kind of speaks at the level that Liverpool will need to be acquiring those kind of players. And there is, I think, there obviously is an element of it that obviously I think we all know that Liverpool have probably been punching above their weight in terms of the last 3 or 4 years, in terms of being able to compete with Manchester City. I don't think anyone expects that on a year in, year out basis. I think obviously top 4, as Klopp has obviously always said, is the bread and butter of the club. It goes back to the self-sustaining ownership of FSG, which, for all it's kind of, I think, times like this obviously do amplify the flaws in that model and why maybe owners who are maybe more desperate to put their hands in the pocket and maybe more hands-on owners, are better. But then obviously you've kind of got the double-edged sword of that in terms of, look at Newcastle United, look at Manchester City, look at Chelsea, kind of look at the kind of issues around those ownerships and that. So I think it's, whilst I don't think FSG are the perfect owners, I think there's certainly worse owners that they could get out there. But I think obviously next summer, I think it is a massive summer for them in terms of, to kind of prove that they are kind of committed to the project and, they are ready to back Klopp because, we obviously signed the contract, less than 6 months ago. And it already looks like, I think obviously everyone had already anticipated that kind of that rebuild and how difficult it would be and, kind of speculated whether Klopp will be around. But obviously now he's committed, they've got the manager. He said today, didn't he, quite defiantly that, he's not tired. He's still ready to give. The players are as well. But, if they don't get Champions League, it's back to square one in a sense of, as Gorst said, all that hard work since October 2015 is almost undone in 9 months, which is, a very long road back in terms of, when you're competing with those, Newcastle United, who are now the richest football club in the world, obviously Manchester City, obviously Chelsea aren't messing around. So yeah, it is a really big thumb. And like I say, if they don't get that Champions League football, not only are you losing the ability to attract those kind of world-class stars that, are really going to kind of revitalise that Liverpool midfield, you're also losing out on the cash to do it, which, kind of speaks for itself in terms of where that will leave Liverpool. And it's, especially, in the kind of just transition as well. Obviously, with Michael Edwards gone, I know obviously Julian Ward worked closely with him, but, you've got someone who's kind of essentially new on the job in that sense, which is obviously going to be a big ask for him to, like it was this summer, he's going to have a big summer ahead of him. So, I think as many things that he can have to kind of make Liverpool an appealing place to play football is obviously going to make his job and his life a hell of a lot easier. If you ask him to go and do that without Champions League football or without the funds and the stuff to compete, then it goes without saying that his job gets, a hell of a lot harder.
Yeah, just to come in on that point, actually, about with the Champions League football, I remember having a conversation with someone at Liverpool, it was maybe last summer, about how, the recruitment staff, how they react to Liverpool's newfound status as being, okay, at the start of this whole project, it was building up slowly, buying players from clubs who were relegated and bringing this team that was sort of inexperienced and making great players. And I said, well, we were speaking about how do you adapt that plan now that you're at the top table? And you can't just buy those, but you can't really restart the project again every 3 years by, we'll start again with signing Sadio Mane from Southampton and hoping he becomes a world-class player and picking Mo Salah from Roma and Andy Robertson from Hull and doing that all over again, or is that the plan to do that? And it was, the shout was no. And you look at the business they've done since they've been that established club. There's almost a reluctance we've seen a reluctance to go into the market, whether that is because they're shopping at a different level now and they're finding that more difficult. But also, has the business since then, is either because of COVID or because of that inability to make decisions, has it been quite as good as originally? So it was really clear for them at the start that they wanted 2 goal-scoring wingers to complement Firmino. That was the first 11. They wanted a really solid midfield. They wanted full-backs who could go forward and centre-halves who could deal with high balls as a consequence of the press. But since then, it's sort of been a little bit mismatched. There's not been a real clear identity of players they were signing. I think Thiago has seemed to me like a bit of a, Jurgen Klopp wanted to scratch that itch of managing him a little bit because he admired him for so long. Diogo Jota comes in. He instantly looks like he's the successor to Sadio Mane. Then Luis Diaz signs, and all of a sudden Jota's the successor to Firmino. Then you sign Nunez, and then it's a little bit like, well, so what's the plan for Jota next? You can't tell me it's ideal that Liverpool wanted to lose Sadio Mane and sign Nunez, knowing he was this raw as well. All these little things add up and make me think that Liverpool aren't quite comfortable with the idea of they don't know what to do when they're in this position, when they're right at the top, how they refresh things and do it in a way that doesn't really, doesn't drop the level massively. And that's a really interesting thing they're going to have to deal with. And maybe if they drop out the Champions League, it will give them space to sort of rebuild again and do what they did last time and build a second great side under Jurgen Klopp. But it's, if they get to that summit again, it'll be interesting to see how they deal with it. Because in my opinion, just judging by their actions in the last few years, I don't think they've dealt with that particularly well. And we've seen that in terms of signings. I don't think there's been a truly great signing who's completely fit in perfectly. Even given Thiago as good as he is, they had to struggle with fitting him in initially. And I just think it's an interesting conundrum they might have to face. And, like I say, if they drop out of the Champions League, maybe that solves the issue for them because they can just do what they did last time.
I think one of the issues is on that point, Lynch, is the fact that the better Liverpool have got, the smaller the pool has got from the talent that's available to them. It was a bit easier 5 years ago when they just qualified for the Champions League and they were bringing in an Andy Robertson from Hull, and Salah was a little bit of a calculated gamble, wasn't it? Klopp wasn't massively sold on him. He had to be told by Barry Hunter and Dave Fallows, wasn't it? And the rest of the team that he was the man to kind of spearhead them going forward. But
which they never probably do now, by the way.
Yeah. I mean,
they need to be 100% on a signing every time at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, they have to be, don't they? Given the level of, well, I suppose they were at when they're competing with City, they know that if they're signing someone for 40, 50 million, it's got to be an absolute smash hit because they can't write it off in the same way that City are able to. I think Naby Keita's the kind of shine a light on that one, isn't he? The fact that he's going to edge into the last 6 months of his Liverpool contract without yet to really convince either way. And I think the fact that every other player in the Liverpool squad has had at least one new contract during the time that he's been at the club kind of speaks volumes to the fact that people have never majorly been kind of sold on him. But, on the flip side of that, Liverpool can't just write it off and think, okay, well, that's something that hasn't worked. Let's move on and bring someone else in for a similar wage, a similar fee, because they're not able to, essentially. So it's difficult, and if they don't make the top four, it's only going to get more difficult. I'm not really sure what the answer is. I think FSG have to throw caution to the wind at this point and just look at where they are in January and think, well, if they don't make the top four, then they really are snookered, particularly with the Anfield Road expansion that's costing 80 odd million, isn't it? So I mean, Liverpool were in a similar situation during the COVID season, but there was maybe a little bit of an acceptance that was just kind of a bit of a strange campaign. You just knuckle down and get through it. But this one will have kind of long-lasting ramifications if Liverpool don't get into the top four, and it's not looking like they're going to do it, is it, at the moment? Let's be honest.
That, just to stick with you, Gorsty, I mean, that's what makes January so important, really, for me. The fact that we're looking at the summer and going, well, whatever happens in the second half of this season really is dependent, on what might happen longer term. I mean, we saw them dip into the market for Luis Diaz, and I don't think they'd have got as close to the quadruple as what they did if they hadn't have done that. We've seen, the impact it can make even on a very good, high-performing team. If Liverpool weren't to do something in January, again, we're in that situation where you'd be surely left wondering why that was at this point in the season.
Yeah, I mean, Klopp always says, doesn't he? You buy a player in January because you wanted them in the summer, and that's fair enough. But then there's this conventional wisdom that January is not really a buyer's market and it's just for players who are kind of not getting game time and moving on. But Liverpool signed Van Dijk in January, didn't they? They signed Coutinho in January, Suarez in January, Sturridge in January. Even going back as far as Daniel Agger when he joined the club, Liverpool have done some really some incredible business really in January. So I don't necessarily buy this idea that, the quality isn't always available. If you're aggressive enough and you want the player enough, then they are available, aren't they? Let's face it. And I think if the ownership were kind of banking on the Champions League income next summer to do whatever it is that they've got planned, I think they need to bring that forward by 6 months and just throw a bit more caution to the wind, because if they don't, then we're going to be looking at the situation Liverpool find themselves in now, where half fit, confident shot players are asked to go again and go again and go again, and at the moment we've seen that they are coming up short, aren't they? I mean, in a way, this sounds terrible, but I'm actually quite pleased, if that's a bit too extreme, that the Arthur Melo transfer has blown up in the face, because they were absolutely just winging that one, where the transfer deadline day, get a lad in who hasn't played for 3 months, who doesn't play for Juventus, bring him in on loan and hope that it cures one or two ills and it papers over the cracks, and it absolutely hasn't. It's terribly unfortunate for him, but Liverpool got away with one in January 2021 when they signed Ozak Kabak and Ben Davies. They did qualify for the Champions League with a team that was largely made up of Nat Phillips and Reece Williams at the back, and somehow they managed to win 8 of the last 10 games and get there. But he tried it again with Arthur Melo, and it's spectacularly backfired on them, hasn't it? So maybe that will be a cautionary tale if they do try anything similar in January.
Yeah, very much a race to get into the top 4 from this point for Liverpool, but still a lot to play for in the Champions League this season. We'll move on now to talk about Napoli for a short while. We'll pick our teams as well in a couple of moments' time. But Lynchy, just on Napoli, first and foremost, one of the informed teams in Europe, one of the best teams, certainly the most exciting attacking teams so far this season. If Liverpool play anything like what they did on Saturday, it could be a cricket score.
Yeah, because as we said, the Anfield factor doesn't even come into it anymore. They can be beaten there as well. So it's a little bit of a worry. I think it's a difficult one. I know we'll talk about our own team selections, but it's a really difficult one for Klopp. I know he said in the press conference earlier, didn't he, that coming up against a team that's in this sort of form is probably not the time for rotation. But he keeps highlighting that one of the biggest problems this season, in his opinion, is that he's not able to rest players. He's not able to make changes. I'd say at the end of the day, this game is ultimately meaningless, in that Liverpool are probably not going to get the 4-0 win they need to progress as group winners. So this is a very rare opportunity in a season that is just packed with games to make changes and for Jurgen Klopp to prove that theory, that if he had more chances to rotate, more ability to rotate his team, then things will be better off this season. So I just think he, regardless of what the score is going to be and what, you've got to think Napoli as well in their heads know that they've qualified as group winners as well, so probably don't have to turn up and smash Liverpool. I just think Jurgen Klopp's got to grasp this opportunity to change things up and make sort of sweeping changes to the team, and then hope that can bring a recovery in the Premier League, because the alternative is putting these players through another game where they're going to look a little bit tired and a bit leggy, and then you take it into the Premier League again at the weekend. I just think just don't miss this opportunity while it's there, because they don't come up very often.
Yeah, I'm with you completely. I think it would be a mistake to do anything other than that. The only sort of thing that I was thinking perhaps, Keifer, is that off the back of Saturday, Klopp won't want another performance like that. He'll probably want to put in a bit of a performance, a bit of rhythm, as he likes to say, in terms of going into that Tottenham game. But I don't know if that doesn't quite feel like the right way of doing it to me. What do you reckon he should do? What do you reckon he might do?
It's a bit of a double-edged sword in the sense, isn't it? But I think, as Dave says there, that Napoli aren't going to be coming full guns blazing, are they, to kind of knock Liverpool aside. There's 2-3 weeks now to the World Cup. I think their players will be welcoming as well, especially the ones who are going to Qatar, of maybe a night off, if you want to call it that. And certainly the way that Liverpool's full strength team has been performing, I wouldn't be expecting them to win by 4 goals anyway. So obviously add that into the equation, but it's certainly an opportunity where the likes of Curtis Jones and even Carvalho, you'd probably put them in there, to give them a bit of minutes, ahead of the game on Sunday. Not that they'd start, but more so to rest the other lads, and then also obviously for them to have something to build onto after the World Cup. I mean, obviously Jones he's only played half an hour or so. Obviously, he played at Forest as well, but he needs something to work on during the World Cup. And if he's only had 2 outings where one which was in a mismatched midfield alongside, Carvalho and Elliott. It's a bit kind of unfair, isn't it, for that to kind of be his first half of the season. So I'd expect him to kind of be in there and be involved in what role. I don't know, maybe off the strikers, Nunes and Salah, because, you think he does have to kind of have a bit of firepower up top, and he doesn't have the options really, does he? But apart from that, you're probably looking at Konate as well. Simic has to come in, but Henderson as well. But apart from that, there isn't. It'd still be a strong enough side you'd expect to kind of to get the job done and even put on a good performance. Even if Liverpool aren't to win. But I mean, I think if they finish second, who are you looking at? You're playing at Bayern Munich, Bruges, if that group stays how it is, Real Madrid, and one more. I think there's 4, isn't there? So you kind of accept that Liverpool are going to be playing one of those. Like I say, it's an almighty ask to kind of flip that score around and with what happened in Napoli. But as Dave says, he's kind of banged on about not having the midfield personnel, especially in the week so far this season. And if he kind of has the opportunity tomorrow night, and then you think there's Derby next week, so you're potentially playing two more full games as full strength. It's certainly manageable. And I think anything other than 6 from 6, but in terms of Spurs and Southampton ahead of the break, I think then that is Liverpool season's gone, especially playing Tottenham. But if they get 6 points from that, you and a game in hand. I know it's against Chelsea, but there's potential there to be 5 points off Newcastle at some point in the season. So that's salvageable. I think I think they could probably turn that around. Especially with some of the teams that come to Anfield. You think of the away games they've played so far this season. What Everton, Arsenal, they will play Tottenham, United as well. Obviously they've got to go to the Etihad, but there is, if Liverpool can kind of patch themselves up and go again, there is winnable games there, even if the kind of atmosphere aura has maybe gone over the weekend. But I think obviously tomorrow is not the big game, is it? It's the one on the weekend and then the one against Southampton before the World Cup. So I think if you can kind of lay the foundations for that tomorrow by giving a few lads a rest off as well, and you got to think. And I know we've just spoken about Thiago then, but he missed a game last year at Spurs, didn't he? I think the midfield they had, that was Morton, Keita, Milner. I think it was obviously a massive pitch down at Spurs. I know Liverpool haven't had it in recent weeks, but there does need to be an element of control, because that game last year, the first half an hour at Spurs was crazy, wasn't it? It could have been 3 or 4. There could have been 3 or 4 goals down. So certainly wouldn't be looking to risk him tomorrow. Probably kind of patch him up and move him on to the weekend.
Yes, with that in mind, then let's move on and pick our teams for the game. It could be an interesting team selector. Gorsty, I'll come to you first. Are we assuming that Addison is in goal and then possibly 1 or 2 changes across the back line?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. They said a couple of Italian journalists in the press conference kind of asked me for the probable lineup, and I was there for about 5 or 10 minutes trying to think of what it actually might be. And I think Trent will play. Tsimikas, Konate will come back in, and I think he'll still go with Van Dijk. I had someone suggesting maybe Calvin Ramsey might start and maybe Van Dijk might drop out, but I don't think he's going to go full League Cup with it. I think that'd be me midfield 3. Me back 4, Alisson in goal, and I'll tell you my midfield 3 after the 2 others have given theirs. Yeah,
mine's pretty similar to you. I think we might see James Milner at fullback, but I fully expect to see Tsimikas and Konate. Lynchy, do you want to talk us through your back 4?
Yeah, I think a good opportunity to get Konate in, and I wonder whether, because there's not a lot riding on it, and I think it's going to be a selection decision between Gomez and Konate at the weekend to partner Van Dijk. Maybe just this is an opportunity to maybe give Virgil a night off and maybe pair those 2 in the centre of defence. Obviously, Tsimikas at left back, I agree with that as well. And Trent has missed some games this season, so it's maybe not got as many miles in the leg. So maybe could maybe do this one again. And I think Alisson, it's different for goalkeepers, isn't it? In terms of they don't cover huge distances or anything like that. So you could probably keep him in for this one.
Yeah, Keifer, do you want to talk us through your defence as well?
Yeah, the same as Gorsty. I've gone with Alisson in goal, Trent, Konate, Van Dijk, and Costas. I think as Gorsty says, obviously, you won't go full League Cup with it, and certainly talk of putting Calvin Ramsey in there. I can't pronounce the lad's name, but against that Georgian lad on on the left would be an almighty ask, wouldn't it? So and Trent, he obviously missed a game against City, so he's had a couple of weeks in the legs, nothing like he's been used to in that sense. And then obviously Klopp said earlier, didn't he, that Konate been training for 8-9 days, so you expect him to come back in alongside Van Dijk. And then, as good as Robertson was on the weekend, another one just, to patch him up and let him have a night off ahead of the game at Tottenham on Sunday.
Yeah, Kvaratskhelia. I've been practicing it in the sort of the build up to this game. Looking forward to seeing him on the left wing for Napoli. Hopefully he plays and they don't rotate him. I am certainly looking forward to watching him. But let's move on to the midfield then. Gorst, do you want to talk us through it?
Yeah, well, the reason I'm going with Milner right back is because I'm putting him in midfield. It's basically just kind of patch it up as best as possible. Milner's one of the few who can play. I'm going to go with Milner, Jones, and Oxlade-Chamberlain, Keita. Obviously, it's a tough one, isn't it? You're trying to give players a little bit of a breather, a little bit of a break from it all. Essentially, maybe Henderson. Yeah, I'll go with Henderson because obviously he didn't start, did he, on Saturday? So he might be freshest of the rest of them at the moment.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Henderson as well. He didn't start, so I think he'll come in for this one. I think I'm going to go with a 4, though. I'll go Carvalho, Henderson, Fabinho and Jones. I know Fabinho could do with the rest, but there's not too many other options. Lynchy?
Yeah, I like the idea. Actually, it is a tough one, this, because it sort of kills you, doesn't it, for the options with Oxlade-Chamberlain in case not being in the squad. So, yeah, Milner not starting at right back, so definitely starting central midfield. I think alongside maybe Henderson, and then with, I think, Jones probably, if he's going to stick with his 4-4-2, maybe Jones coming in off the left and Elliott on the right, maybe. I think that sort of gives you maybe options then to change things up before Tottenham and gives the sort of key men a rest. I think if Henderson does start in that midfield, if he does come in, then you'd maybe want to just give him a few minutes, 60 minutes, and maybe sub him just to sort of keep him fresh, because I think he will. I'd like to think he might come in to a midfield 3 at the weekend, but we'll see on that one, I suppose.
Yeah, that's kind of my thinking as well. I think Fabio Carvalho didn't play at all, did he, at the weekend? So I'm going to go with him. Keifer, midfield?
I've gone a bit different. I've gone for the diamond, but I've kind of persisted with Fabinho. I mean, what other options are there to really then other to try and play him into some kind of form, and maybe tomorrow night, fingers crossed, might be what's got to be better than Saturday. And then obviously for Henderson, obviously not playing not starting even on Saturday. I've gone for him. And then it was a bit of a toss up between Carvalho and Milner. Because onto my last pick, I've gone with Jones just off Núñez and Salah. So that was why I was tempted to put Milner in there, but I just think obviously Carvalho, he hasn't started, has he, since the 7-1 win over Rangers? So he could do with some minutes, and he's probably not going to play at the weekend, is he? So you're probably looking at throwing him in there and kind of giving him some more time. So yeah, that'll be my 4: Fabinho sitting, Henderson, Carvalho, and then Jones off the strikers. I think obviously he kind of got thrown in, didn't he, at Forest unexpectedly with what happened to Thiago, and obviously it wasn't a position that he was comfortable in, and I just think obviously he's had such a stop-start, last 18 months or so, really, hasn't he, Jones? And maybe it's be better to see him in a more advanced role. It kind of feels that when he does play on that off the left of the midfield 3, what it used to be. It probably wasn't his role. Kind of saw how he flew through the ranks in the academy, playing, on the left of a forward 3 and then behind the striker. So I just think tomorrow, you've not got an awful lot to lose if you do lose the game, and it might be one to just add something more to kind of his assets and maybe just kind of see how it fares.
Yeah, it was James Milner on the pre-match press conference, wasn't it? So that's usually a surefire sign that they're going to start. But we shall see. Gorsty, your attack?
I imagine we've all got the same attack, because there aren't any options, are there, really? These lads are probably counting down the days for the end of that Southampton game, and you can have a bit of a rest. It's obviously Firmino, Núñez and Salah. I mean, those injuries to Jota and Diaz has just come at the absolute worst time, haven't they? And I've been banging the drum all season for why didn't he replace Minamino and or Keita? I can understand letting one of them go, but not both of them when you're not bringing in someone else. Because they were massively influential, weren't they, for winning the 2 things that Liverpool won last season. And to just kind of discard them without Any thoughts of a replacement? Kind of highlights, I don't know, maybe a little bit of arrogance. But either way, we'll have 3 fit forwards, so those are the 3 forwards who are playing.
Yeah, I'd have gone with Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain if he was actually in the Champions League squad, but that feels like a bit of a mistake as well. I'm going to go Salah and Nunez, and obviously gone with the 4-4-2, so don't need a third man. But Lynchy, I can't remember how many midfielders you picked, but how many forwards are you going to pick?
Yeah, so my midfield was sort of, if they're sticking with the diamond, Milner to hold, Henderson on the right, Jones on the left, Elliott in the sort of number 10 position that Firmino's been playing. So that leaves you can play Firmino up top maybe to give Salah a rest, and maybe Nunez alongside him, because I think he sort of, it'd just be good to keep him playing and see if he can get goals and get his confidence up. He just needs to get minutes in his legs, I think, and to sort of score as many goals as he can to make himself feel like he's a big part of this team if he can, and then it leaves you Salah then to maybe come off the bench later on to give him a rest and hopefully keep everyone in shape for Tottenham.
Yeah, I'm sure Salah will play a part at some point if he gutted. If he didn't, Keifer, who are you going to pick?
I've given you my midfield 4, so I've gone for Jones at the top of the diamond, which a bit of a wild shout, but why not be fun with it? And then obviously I've gone for Nunez and Salah as the 2. I just think obviously kind of keep them, that kind of partnership, kind of give it as many minutes as possible, especially with such a big game at the weekend. I think there was more promising signs, wasn't there, on Saturday in attack? I mean, I know obviously they didn't finish the chances, but Nunez had a couple into those runs that we kind of talked about in his absence. They still come in. It just feels like maybe he just needs that extra kind of ounce of composure and hopefully if he can get another couple of goals tomorrow, or even just another couple of chances, and just maybe get a bit more used to kind of what it's like to be a Liverpool attacker kind of thing. It's only going to help him. So yeah, I won't be giving him the night off, and same with Salah. I know he scored the goal against City, but just kind of again play him into the form that that he was in this time last year, really, when he was arguably the best player on the planet. So yeah, I've got those 2 up top, and giving Firmino the night off. I think he started the last 5 or 6 games or so. So it's just a case with Liverpool being so light on forward options. It's more just a case of not to risk anything ahead of Tottenham, where I'd put him back in.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Well, we'll do match predictions next. I think that's going to be a pretty tough game to try and predict, to be honest. We don't know quite what Liverpool are going to do, quite what Napoli are going to do. I'll go for 1-1. Gorsty, what do you reckon?
I've kind of been like Mark Lawrence on this pod with the predictions, where he famously predicted Liverpool to go 4 seasons invincible or whatever it is. But I can't see Liverpool winning this tomorrow. If Napoli show up intent to get the 3 points, I think Napoli are going to win, because as Klopp said today, they're the informed team in Europe. They've scored 50 goals in all competitions already, which is an astounding amount. You think that Liverpool scored 41, and they scored 16 of those in 2 games. Absolutely flying. Kvaratskhelia is that how you pronounce it, Matt? I'm looking forward to watching him. So yeah, I can see Napoli winning, in all honesty.
Lynchy, same for you, or did Liverpool get something?
Yeah, I just think it's going to be a bit of a mixed team for Liverpool, and so that sort of rhythm won't be there. And if Napoli turn up, even if they make a couple of changes, I still think they'll, just because they feel like they're absolutely flying, will probably have enough to win the game. And so, yeah, I think maybe Napoli 3-1.
Keifer?
Yeah, I'm going to go full house of defeats here. Probably all the reasons that the 2 lads have said. They're flying. They're one of the unbeaten teams in Europe. 5 points clear top of Serie A. As Gorsty says, if they come with kind of any intent, or just kind of anything close to full strength, they'll have a field day. And why would they not? They're coming to Anfield. Why not try and get that win? They haven't won here, have they? In the last 4 visits or whatever. So be a big statement as well. I know obviously Liverpool aren't flying, but what a statement that would send to around Europe as well, and if not domestically in their league. So feel 3-1, but might be a bit. I can't see Liverpool scoring, to be honest. Just the amount of chances they're missing. So I don't want to go 3-0. That's too harsh, isn't it? I'll go 2-0.
Well, it's not quite as harsh as what Theo said a couple of weeks ago before the Manchester City game. So hopefully we're all as wrong as he was then. But I think we shall leave it there for now. Jurgen Klopp and James Milner's press conferences both up on the Blood Red YouTube channel if you've not watched those yet. Open training to come very shortly, just kicking off as we record this podcast. So that should be up as well a little bit later on. But yeah, until next time from all of us here, it's goodbye for now.